Welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Author Series. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is Taking Care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. You can check out our upcoming schedule at wab.org. We're so happy to have Hilary Leichter with us this evening. First, we'll hear from Hilary, and then she'll be in conversation with Dennis Norris II, author of Ost Collection. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're there. Feel free to submit questions to the Q&A function. Hilary's book, Temporary, is available through our bookstore, Ampersand Books. I'll put the link in the chat. The New York Times has called Temporary a brisk, wildly imaginative first novel. Leichter's deeper interest is in mining how transient, insecure work inflects our private life. If it even permits a private life. Can we afford to stop working? Do we remember how? Temporary was a finalist for the Center for Fiction's first novel prize and one of Publishers Weekly's best books of 2020. Hilary Leichter's writing has appeared or is forthcoming in The New Yorker, Harper's, N+1, Book Forum, Conjugations, The Cut, and American Short Fiction. She teaches at Columbia University. Hilary, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. And thank you all for coming. And thank you to Dennis for agreeing to be in conversation with me tonight. This is almost exactly a year from the date that my book was published and then disappeared into the fog of the pandemic. And so Dennis and I are both wearing the outfits that we planned to wear for that book launch that never was. And I have a little cocktail. Dennis, do you have a drink?
I have wine.
There we go. So we're celebrating. Cheers
Yeah.
to all of you for being here with us. We're treating this as like a belated book birthday. And thank you for coming. So I'm going to start out reading. I don't know. What am I going to read? No, I do know. I planned it. I'm not a total flake. I'm going to read a little section from my novel, Temporary. And if you don't know, the book is about a woman who works as a temp, but her jobs are a little bit different than the kinds of temp jobs that are available in our world. For example, she works as a pirate, she works as an assassin, she works as a mother, and even as a barnacle. And so this section is one of the interstitial chapters in the book that kind of deals with the mythology of the temporary worker in the world of the novel and how that kind of came to be, this kind of form of capitalism in the book, where it came from. I wanted to write a myth and an origin story for work and the way that we work today, and that's this. The gods created the first temporary so they could take a break. Let there be some spare time, they said, and cover for us, won't you? Here are all our passwords and credentials. She fell from the husk of a meteor and glowed with no particular ambition. They had to pin her down so she would not float away. So very much distracted was this new kind of soul, so subject to drift. The gods had not yet created gravity. This was back when toads without occupation soared straight up to the clouds, back when employment was the only kind of honest weight you could apply to a life. The first temporary was encouraged to replicate the god's image, even though she was not specifically created to resemble any of them. This was a job description added ex post facto, and so she forever was to learn her permutations, her shorthand methods of duplication, contortions of empathy. Her handwriting was the perfect facsimile of the handwriting everyone expected. She lived in the space between who she was and whom she was meant to replace. More responsibilities for the first temporary, and she completed the tasks with aplomb, filed the backup documents, checked each item off her list. Burn this bush, one god said, and so she did. Now put the bush back the way it was, another god said, and the first temp learned the drudgery of tasks done and undone, the brutal makings and unmakings of the earth. Can I stay? Permanently? She asked, and the gods just laughed and went to lunch. The first temporary studied the world. She noted the shortcomings of the gods, their tempers and their feuds. It was their bureaucracy that allowed for her existence. She noted the fallacy of permanence. Oops. It's bound to happen. She noted the fallacy of permanence in a world where everything ends and desired that kind of permanence all the same. One afternoon, when her work was finished, she had an hour to spare for insubordination. With her eyes closed, she created a series of friends. No employees. No colleagues, she thought. The temporaries emerged from the soles of her sensible shoes, then scattered with the wind. She reached down from the sky to find them, dipped her hand into a stream, and pulled them from the current like an oar from a canoe, digging deep into the water and lifting forth. She wiped them off and patted them dry and gave them leather planners, inky pens, laminated instructions for how to interact with the world. They were travelers, created as such with the breeze at their backs, meant to fill any gaps the gods had forgotten. There were stars in the sky, but still no moon, and a temporary rounded her body into an iridescent orb. Great idea, one god said, feasting on honeydew, and the moon was made in her image. The intentions of the moose were always unclear to the elk, and a temporary vaulted her arms into antlers, so the animals could lock themselves into thorny disagreements, then eventually solutions. Shoelaces were always frayed at the ends. A temporary reduced herself to a fraction of her size, capped an aglet on the laces. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Keep losing my place. Capped an aglet on the laces with her new plastic countenance. The sky would not meet the sea, and so a temporary folded herself into a thin connecting strip of mist and air, henceforth called a horizon. The world accumulated more stuff, but stayed the same size. Clutter gave the impression of completion, but the first temp knew there was still work to be done. Get clever, she told her colleagues. They noted the absence of microwave-safe pottery and hollowed their bodies into bowls, plates, mugs, forgotten and left to sit in their own filth. They noticed the absence of storage and stretched themselves into closets. They noticed the continuous departures of kindness and sloughed their skins to wear their hearts on their sleeves as reminders. They always noticed with relief prodigal kindness making its inevitable return. The temporaries grew sturdier legs, more robust arms, less prone to willy-nilly transformation. They evolved and took their places in the crowd. They fit in and filled in. Thousands of years changed over like a crossing signal, and the temporaries crossed the street. Sometimes the crosswalk was not enough for traffic, and yet a temporary hit by a bus was rarely mourned or replaced. After all, who would bother replacing a replacement? In this way, the temporaries had a sort of elastic permanence of their own. But now will you hire me full-time? Asked the first temp. Come into our office, the god said, and she followed them to their desks. I really love your creativity, one god said with a hint of ellipsis, and the first temp correctly predicted a forthcoming ominous but. There were no full-time positions open. Will there be an opening sometime soon? Perhaps, the god said. Soon is relative in the grand scheme of our enterprise. Will there be an opening sometime soon? The first temp asked after another 100 years. Soon is relative. Soon? She asked when her calendar reminded her to check again. Soon is relative. Soon? Soon. The first temp rolled herself out of the god's office and into the bathroom at the end of the hall. It wasn't really a hallway, you'll understand, but more the approximation of those emotions associated with walking and arriving. It wasn't really a bathroom either, but it felt the way office bathrooms do, fluorescent, echoing, cold and tiled. The first temp locked herself in a bathroom stall and became the first temp to cry in the bathroom at work, the very first of her kind. The hot tears fell down her face and she used her sleeves to blot them away. She sat on the toilet seat in her dress, tapping her foot, waiting for the moment to subside. She was undone, and that's when a handful of tissues appeared under the door. The first temp emerged and found herself surrounded by her temporary colleagues. They held mugs of tea and tubes of mascara and pouches of chocolates. It's okay, they said, patting her shoulders and fixing her hair. We'll wait until you're feeling better. We've got nothing else to do. We have nowhere else to be, only here with you. After she had collected herself, she returned to her desk with an escort of temporaries. Then they dispersed again, through the office, out into the world. Oh, we're so sorry, said the gods, hovering over the first temp's desk. She felt their sorrow was genuine. She knew when they were genuine because she was built to feel the world through active, staggered checks of compassion. She could not help but understand where they were coming from because it was where she came from too, because she was meant to begin where other people ended. She lived in the acute angle that forecasted the world's limitations. If they had locked her in a room made of ice, she would have probably seen their side of things, shimmering in her own reflection. She filled in when the gods went for long weekends. She filled her days until none were left, and then she started over. She watched her colleagues while they slept and prayed for them to find their steadiness, even if she could not. The lunch breaks were short and staggered. There was always a small sandwich in a small sandwich bag. There was always a deadline or a timeline. There was always a brightly colored pen and a fresh notebook. She could find glimmers of joy in this ephemeral life. She guided the temporaries through their placements, preserved their infinite time in this infinite world to perhaps ensure for them something more sacred than survival. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. I love hearing you read from this book every time that I have the opportunity to. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for choosing that section because it brings up a couple of thoughts for me. One of them is structure on sort of like a craft element, and the other one is just that even though it appears towards the end of the book, it kind of is like a really perfect sort of summation or reverberation of everything I think that comes before it, sort of thematically. And so I think the first question I want to ask you is about, hopefully I can say this in a way that makes sense. There are moments in this book that feel like the temp that we're following, it feels incredibly personal. And then there are these larger moments that sort of echo and reverberate into the larger themes of this book. And you're able to move between those two sort of sizes of things in these really quick spaces. So like, even in that section, I kept thinking about the moment where after she's collected herself, the gods are like, we're so sorry. And they're hovering over her desk. And I feel like that is an experience that so many of us have at some point in the workplace with our bosses. but she feels that their sorrow is genuine, and it's because she comes from where they come from. And that made me think of larger systems, the system of capitalism, the systems that our society is built on. And I wonder how you were able to approach making this book feel so personal, and yet speaking so beautifully and specifically about the larger systems that we have to operate in order to survive, let alone thrive, which is kind of what you're gesturing to at the very end, I think.
You're so smart.
That's such a big question. Like,
All of that was totally 100% intentional. I meant to do that. No, that's part of the fun in talking to you about this book, because Dennis and I are pretty close friends, really close friends.
Yeah, very close friends.
Been there through my process of writing it and selling it and then talking about it. The most fun for me is hearing what other people find in the book. And when I was writing it, I never thought about it as a commentary on anything but my experience of the world, and I think that's where the personal elements come from in here. I was not working for a temp agency, but I was working in the gig economy and doing a lot of these permalance type jobs. And I was lost. And so that's the feeling that drives the book. And then there's a recurring quote in the book that the temp sort of repeats to herself like a mantra. There's nothing more personal than doing your job. And over the course of writing, I mean, I think what you're asking about is there a way to separate the personal from these larger structures? And I don't think there is. So even though I'm not an economist or an expert in capitalism, although I've had to sort of become one this year and talk, everyone is an expert in their own experience of the workplace. And so I wrote it from a place of my own experience, which was an expert position, because I don't know anything better than my own story. And it's impossible to write your own story, I think, without commenting on something larger.
That's true. And you, I mean, we've had so many conversations about work life and all of the different ways in which these systems trickle down into our lives. And the next thing that I'm sort of thinking about with that is the fact that, like, you have written about your life in such an interesting way. And I am going to ask you if you want to talk about any of the really interesting and fun positions that you've had over the years. But before I get to that question, I want to ask you about this book you've written from your own experience, and yet this book is wildly imaginative. I mean, the concept of these temps, to me, it feels like in some ways they're the rulers of the world, and they've helped shape the world that you live in. And the literal jobs, the pirate ship job, the sort of mother job, the store mannequin job, or just, these are like 3 examples. But I guess I've been reading your writing for a long time, and the question that I've always wanted to know is, like, where does all of this come from? Like, I couldn't come up with this if I like spent 100 years trying to do it. And I just want to know, like, how you came up with some of the specifics here, and also kind of how this book came in. I know how this book came into being, but I would love for you to share how the book came into being.
I mean, Dennis, you know better than anyone that I worked for years as a pirate and then as a so this is very highly autobiographical. No, I was talking to a group of undergrads the other day at George Washington, and someone asked a similar question to this, which is, how do you write something weird? How do you write something strange? And I think there are 2 approaches to writing anything. And that's like a bold statement, so just ignore me if you don't agree with what I'm about to say. But I really think that, especially for young writers and for debuts, there's the approach of starting from a place of your own experiences, literally. So realism, and Dennis, I think that's what you do so well. These highly vibrant, realistic scenarios and scenes between real people talking in real sentences in real rooms to one another.
Not walking pirate planks.
And then there's the approach of starting as far away from yourself as humanly possible. And in both scenarios, where you end up is crucial. So I think, when you're starting from a place of realism, you end up somewhere that answers a question you didn't know you had. In other words, you end up somewhere strange. And I think when you start from a place of the strange, you end up where you live. And it's a question of how you approach the blank page. I don't want to say that I don't have like a brilliant realist novel in me because I would love to write that someday. But for whatever reason right now, and for much of my young adult life, the way that I got into narratives was from the peculiar and the distant, and the opposite of the idea of writing what you know, writing what you don't know. And making your way back home to what you do know. So in writing this book, I could say that I just came up with the pirate ship and that was just a brilliant stroke of imagination, but really examining it, there are so many ways that story filters through into my own life. I mean, I was definitely thinking of the Pirates of Penzance because I'm a musical theater nerd. I was thinking of this photo I have of my great grandmother who was in silent movies, and she was in this one movie called Powder Puff Pirates. It's just this picture of all these women in short shorts in like 1919 on the deck of a pirate ship fighting. And so,
oh my gosh,
remember the ways that where the imagination lives. I don't think that that's part of the writing process, though. I think that's part of the editing process and the process of understanding what you wrote after you've written it. But yeah, so that's the answer to the first part of your question. I think the second part of the book come to be is a much easier answer in a way. I wanted to write a book. I had finished my master's. I had this collection that was sort of cockeyed and not really working, of short stories. And I was working on another novel, which you met to read with me at like 7:00 in the morning at the coffee down the street from my apartment. And it was a fun project, but it was agonizing for me. And I just couldn't find a way into it. I couldn't find a way through it. And Temporary was a short story that I had written as part of my thesis and published it. And so of course I was done with it. But then I went back to look at it and realized that it was still very much the life I was living. And I thought, I think this is what I want to be writing about. And so listening to that voice inside you that's like, no, this is what I'm interested in right now is so crucial. At least it was for me. And so I went back to it and I had the time of my life. I wrote the book in 2 months and edited it for a long time after that. But I just wanted to have fun. I just wanted to get past the bullshit of trying to create something for the sake of creating it, and back to that place of play where no one knew what I was working on, and it was this private thing, this secret thing. And I think that that's something that kids have and that adults have to work really hard to get back to, that imagination zone, which I think is actually the name of a gymnastics place in New York.
Probably. I had a birthday party at Discovery Zone when I was 8.
Discovery Zone, that's what I'm thinking. But honestly, I wanted to get back to the Discovery Zone. I wanted to get back to that place of play and that feeling that I was creating something that was exciting and fun for me, and everyone else could just deal with that later, and that everyone else I would deal with them after it was done. And that's what I did. And it created this kind of weird thing, but I had the time of my life writing it. I really did.
I mean, one, that's badass to take a novel that you had been working on for as long as you've been working on that other one and just be like, you know what, I'm done with you. Like, we're moving on. And to just, I think that's a thing that would scare a lot of writers, And not to say that you were or weren't scared when you did it, but you just were like, I have to do this. And this actually makes me think of something that we talk about. So for audience members who are here, if you're not familiar with me, I am on this podcast called Food, the number 4 and Thought, spelled THOT, and it's for creative writers, and we talk a lot about a lot of things. So it's pop culture and it's NSFW, but we talk a lot about writing and our process of being writers. And a debate that we constantly are having, usually in our group chat and also on Twitter, is whether or not it's important for writers to feel joy as they are writing. And I'm curious to know, Hilary, what your thought on that question is, either for yourself or just in general, if you want to make a proclamation.
Yeah, no, I'm so suspicious of proclamations. And for me at that time in my life, which was already 5 years ago, so that's how long it takes to write and publish a book. For the place, I had just turned 30. I was a little bit lost. And for the project that it was, yes, I think coming from a place of joy was crucial to writing the book that I wrote. The book I'm writing now is different. It's a very different experience. It's a lot more based in research. And it's also fun, but it's a different kind of fun. I think it really depends on the project and the writer and the time in the writer's life. And there are a lot of different ways that you can surprise yourself by the thing that you choose to write. And I think that element of surprise is the thing that's really important. And whether it's like being surprised by pathos or being surprised by humor or being surprised by just like unbridled discovery zone fun, whatever it is, if you're surprised by the process, the reader will be too. I really believe that.
I think that's really important too, and I love that lesson. I do want to make sure we get this question in. I wonder if you would talk a little bit about you. Hilary has had a long and winding sort of career and like string of jobs and gigs throughout her time in New York, some of which I've inherited from her.
Who hasn't had a long and winding?
Yeah. It's sometimes I meet these people who've been at like one place for like a long time, and I'm just like, how is that possible? I don't know how that works. But I just wonder if you would talk about any of them, and if there are any experiences from them that you drew upon when you were writing the book, certain moments of the book or anything like that.
Yeah, I think I'm really lucky because while I've had a slew of unpredictable and wildly underpaid jobs, I've never had a job that has asked me to sacrifice my safety or my health. And I mean, health in quotes, I've certainly like worked too many hours for no pay, and that's a kind of a mental health situation. But I feel really grateful that the bad jobs that I've had are not truly bad jobs. And as we've seen this year, there's a different, or even today, watching Amazon comment on its workers having to urinate in plastic bottles. And today is the anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory too, and fire. It's not the anniversary of the factory, it's the anniversary of the fire. And so those are bad jobs, like a job where you're asked to risk your life so that you can pay your bills. The jobs that I've had are dehumanizing in a different way, which is a much milder, like kind of ennui of dehumanization, where you just have an employer who doesn't know you, doesn't value you, and doesn't really like comment on your existence. And that certainly has its own kind of wear and tear. It builds up and it can make you feel very lonely. It can make you feel very insecure. And when you're piling on the same kind of job over and over again to forestall poverty, it can feel endless. But overall, like I've worked as a personal assistant. I've worked as a the temp doing, expenses and filing. I've worked as a barista. I've worked at nonprofits. I've worked as a tutor. I've worked as a teacher. I've worked as a, what is it? A butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker.
I think you've literally done like 2 of those.
Yeah, like just a menagerie of jobs. And the thing that I found is at every place I've worked, while there is just this kind of dread and lack of support, there's also always at least one person, usually more, who takes such pride in their work, no matter what it is, that I leave feeling, I don't know, kind of energized and hopeful for people. Does that answer your question? I mean, I've never been a barnacle, but I felt stuck and I felt at sea. And I've never been a pirate, but I've felt scared by workplace dynamics. I've never been an assassin, but I've been asked to do things I morally disagree with. So that all the jobs come from less the day-to-day experiences of work and more just the emotional experiences of having a job.
Yeah, well, and I think that's part of why this book was so wonderfully well received, is because I feel like everyone can relate to that. And we rarely talk about these things outside of, our support system that we have at work if we have one, and maybe perhaps our friend group, perhaps our family, but sort of having a bigger conversation. And one of the things that was so perfect about the timing of when this book came out, I thought, is that 2020 was a year in which many workplaces had to reckon with many things, and people were at home and they had the energy to tweet about things and to talk about things. And I just sort of thought that this book, in its quirky way, was a precursor to some of that for so many people.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's interesting to hear that, because obviously I didn't know what was coming around the bend when I wrote the book, but that's just even more of a testament to the fact that you don't get to decide what you wrote, everyone else does. And I'm glad that people have found something to relate to in this book. It's the shock of my life. I wish it were irrelevant, that would be the greatest gift of all, if this book just drifted into total irrelevance and was a relic of a time where we were less evolved. That would be my ideal journey.
I mean, maybe that happens one day. I have kind of I think I have one more question. And then if we have time, I'd love for you to just read a little bit more, something to close us out.
Yeah, if anyone has questions too, you can.
Oh, also, yes, let me see. But I wanted to ask you about the steadiness.
Okay, yeah.
And I guess I wanted to ask maybe how, where that idea came from. And now we're a year out of publication from your book, Hilary Leichter. Have you found the steadiness?
Maybe.
I think maybe you have too.
So for people who have not read the book yet, the steadiness is the temporary's version of a full-time job, but it's like this mystical thing that just sort of happens to you. It's like falling in love is the way that they describe it. It's like you don't know until you know, and when you stop looking for it, it just kind of descends on you. And in the original draft of my book, it didn't have a name. It was just permanence, or a full-time job, or a place in the world, or a placement, and my very, very smart agent said, kind of said in not so many words, like, can you just spell it out for us? like we need to understand what she actually wants, what that actually means. And write another scene or write another chapter, or just say what it is that she's looking for. And so then I had the idea to name it. and to give it a name. And I think this really magical thing happens when you invent a vocabulary for your project that's new. Steadiness does not mean in the book what it means in our world. It sort of does. And that also means that it can be misunderstood in the world of the book. And so by the end of the book, it comes to mean something very different than the temp thought it did. And that's just so much fun to create these kind of arcane etymological histories for words that already exist to us, but to change them, to make them new. So that's where that came from. And as soon as I named it, I was like, oh, this is like so much better. This is great. And what was, oh, did I find the steadiness?
Yeah.
Well, I can say that for the first time in my life, I'm only doing work that relates to my chosen career, which is a big deal for me. So I'm teaching and writing and editing, and I'm not doing anything else. For the first time ever, I'm going to be 36 this spring. So in that sense, yes, I think I have found some steadiness, but I don't think there's steadiness for one if there isn't steadiness for all. So no.
Yeah. So no, until we all find it. Lord knows I ain't found it yet. We're working on it. I'm on the cusp.
Careful what you wish for.
That's true. That's true. Okay, we have, I wanted to see if there's any questions in the chat. I know there's one in the Q&A.
Oh no, it's just Emily in the Q&A. Hi, Emily.
Oh, hi, Emily.
What a this is.
Oh, that's so amazing. Well, we're almost at time, but is there anything else that you want to say or share from the book? We only have 2 minutes. I don't know if there's anything you want to, any reading that you want to squeeze in. I always love to hear words from this book, but.
I mean, I think I could read maybe the very first page of the book. That might be fun.
Yes.
There's also a question here. What is the job description for a barnacle? May I apply? The answer is, oh my God, can you hear the sirens?
We live in New York.
The answer is no, you don't want that job. Okay, so I'm just gonna read, this is the very first page of the novel. Onboarding. There was the assassin, there was the child, there was the marketing and the fundraising, and also the development. There was the keeper of the donor list, there was the shredder of the master list, there was the washer, and there was the dryer. And there was she who dispensed the dryer sheets. She donned them like veils, then dropped them in the machine. There was the folder of socks. There was the dropper of bombs. There was the knocker of doors. How many people live in your home? And would you like to support our cause? Will you buy some citrus fruit? Would you care for some literature? There was the house with the doors that opened and closed. There were solutions that needed managing. There was the shepherd of pamphlets. There was the checker of facts, and later the checker of spells. There was the learning on the job and the lying on the job. There was late for work, and there was early. There was even right on time. The box of stamps and the corkboard calendar and the pink book of message sheets to tell you what happened exactly, specifically, in detail, while you were out. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Dennis. This was so much fun.
Oh my gosh, thank you for writing this amazing book and for being my friend all these years and for asking me to do this with you. It was like what I've been dreaming for ever since we found out that the book was going to be a book.
It's my honor to do an event with you.
Yay. Awesome.
Oh my God, Justin Daner Best is here.
Oh my God, yes. So many great peeps.
Lovely.
All right, well, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Yeah, thank you to Hilary. Thank you to Dennis. Buy the book on Ampersand Books. I will say it is my staff pick, so you can get it at a slight discount there. And you can also find videos of our past readings, including this one, will be up on our website, wab.org. So I want to say thanks so much for coming, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.